Hi, I'm Kirby Allison. Today I'm very excited to welcome Charlie Griffiths into the office, a founder and president of Vigilant Inc., an incredible manufacturer of humidors, walk-in humidors, cabinet humidors, and wine cellars, and the person that built my walk-in humidor, Cigar Keep by Vigilant. So, Charlie, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me, Kirby.
And you know, we've spoken a lot over the course of this project, and I'm sure, as it is probably true with many of your projects, is really, for me at least, was kind of a dream come true to finally be able to build a walk-in humidor. I mean, it's the holy grail for anyone passionate about collecting and really aging their cigars. And of course, Vigilant here in the United States is the really preeminent specialist specializing in the construction of walk-in humidors. In addition to that, I mean, you do walk-in wine cellars, which we'll talk about, and then cabinet humidors, which we're now listing on kirbyallison.com, which is kind of an exciting extension. But it's great to have you in. I can't wait to show you the humidor.
Looking forward to it.
First things first, let's go check that out.
Okay.
Grab some cigars and then come back and kind of talk shop.
Sounds like a good plan.
Join me. Well,
wow.
Here we are.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, it's your handiwork here, and it's. I'm interested to kind of know what you think because, I mean, you do a lot of projects, remotely, effectively, and you're not able to go on site and see everything.
True.
And so I'm interested to know, one, did our installer, do justice and honor to the woodworking?
Absolutely.
Out of your shop?
Looks really, really good. Love the flooring and the ceiling, and obviously, as we talked about, the more wood you have in here, the better. The cigars love it, and it's just a nice. I think you were very involved in the actual design.
Yeah.
And while we do work remotely, with technology, we're able to interface with you or the customer and be able to mesh our capabilities with your design needs and what you're looking for so that you get what you want, but it also, we're able to impart our knowledge of how, things go together best and what's best for the display and, storage of your cigars, and you've done a really fabulous job. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting kind of demonstration of, I feel like whenever I first we were designing this, it felt massive, right? And whenever we first installed it, I was like, this is going to take a lifetime to fill this thing up. And here we are, barely a year and a half later, and it's like, wow, I actually think I need more room. And one of the things I did that I'm happy that I did is we were going to end up with a little bit of dead space on the other side of this.
Yeah.
And so, at that point, the cost of expanding the wall 4 feet was nothing.
Right.
And I installed some shelving to give me some overstock.
Sure.
Runway. But it's it's beautiful. It's everything I ever dreamt of. And I guess this is probably one of the great joys of your job is that
seeing it all come together.
Seeing it come together, but someone that's building a wine cellar or even more so a cigar humidor it's a true dream in many cases.
It really is.
And to help bring that to reality is got to be exciting.
People are excited, right? I mean, it's more than just taking care of your cigars. It's doing it in an elegant way and something that you enjoy looking at and that's beautiful and shows craftsmanship. And as you talked about filling this up, I mean, one as you're experiencing now, keeping it organized is important, right? Because you can forget what you have. This is a little bit of an embarrassment of riches, I must say. And as it grows and grows, I mean, you may have a lot of one manufacturer, but you've got a lot of cigars within that manufacturer. When you got them, what they are, how old they are. I know we're going to talk a little bit about long-term storage. And so the organization, you can't overlook the organizational part of it.
Absolutely.
The practical part of it.
There's two interesting dynamics, I think, at play. One of them is, as Edward Sockin says, you want to be able to come in and talk to your cigars.
Right.
And if you have your cigars in a wine fridge or a cabinet humidor like Tetris, which ultimately it begins with you have a lot of room, but then the drift is collecting, is hoarding.
Sure.
You always end up in a place where it's a game of Tetris.
Right.
and you can't see everything. I mean, in order to see one box, you've got to take everything out.
Right.
And so, someone that, truly loves cigars and loves collecting cigars, being able to come in and see them, as Edward Sahakian would say, talk to them, sweetly to ensure that they're aging well is important.
Right.
And then just, the visual satisfaction of seeing
cigar boxes are beautiful.
Is something else. And then also the confidence of knowing that it's being stored properly. And this was, really the catalyst for our entire project together was at a certain point, here with cigars, but even with wine, you end up with what is a significant financial asset.
Absolutely.
And so, the beauty of what Vigilant is doing is that in a larger environment, you're able to buffer the fluctuations of humidity and temperature more than with a small environment where you see massive, wild swings.
Right, you can.
And then you're able to have more sophisticated equipment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So while we're in here, right, why don't you talk through a little bit about, the equipment? When looking to have a large walk-in humidor, is it the equipment for humidification cooling different than with a smaller end table or cabinet?
It is. Obviously, as you're highlighting, you've got a much larger space. But as you mentioned, the larger space does allow for more air to flow and for less intense, movement of air around in a small condensed space. So what you've chosen to do is the ultimate proper way to do it, which is, as we've talked about, you can't really control humidity if you're not controlling the temperature, because we're talking relative humidity relative to the temperature. So you could have a humidification system that is good and set to the humidification that's ideal for you. In your case, you like it a little drier. You're in the mid-60s, low to mid-60s. But if you're having huge temperature swings based on where it is, the room it's in, obviously we don't want a lot of ultraviolet light getting into the room. It's not good for the cigars either. Can bleach them out. So with temperature swings innately become humidity swings because of the change in temperature, the relative change to it. So that's a huge, if you want to get to the ultimate level of control and consistency, you've got to be doing both.
Yeah, yeah. And here we're utilizing the Wine Guardian for cooling.
Right.
And then, and those units have a humidification option to it, but you actually recommended using a separate humidification system for Condair.
It's the unit they use is really not that precise. It's more the challenge. The challenge anytime, whether it's wine or cigars with cooling, is that the process of cooling dehumidifies. So you can't. People say, well, why wouldn't you just use a room air conditioner? Well, room air conditioners are not meant to cool that low, and when they do, one of the benefits of room air conditioning that people don't pay attention to is that they're dehumidifying and making it more comfortable. Yeah. And you don't want that with cigars for sure. You don't want it with wine either. So you have to do it differently. So the way the cooling is done for wine or for cigars is they don't drop the temperature of the coil down as much because the cold coil will evaporate moisture, condense moisture out of the air. And then that moisture gets evacuated. In the case of a residential cooling system, it gets drained off into a drain right out into your garden. And you don't want that. You want that moisture to stay in the room. Yeah. So when you raise the coil temperature, you have to increase the amount of air flowing over. And when you do get condensation coming off any coil, you don't drain it away. You leave it in the room and let the fan that's blowing that cool air blow that moisture back into. So no cooling system. It controls humidity, but cooling systems designed for cigars and wine do not dehumidify. And then you've also introduced active humidity separately, and by doing so, now you've got, it's actually ideal, right? They're related to one another, but they're operating on their own. Yeah. And therefore, you've got that balance. As long as the systems are doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're set where they are. You've got a really nice balance there. Yeah. And you've got consistency. And as you've talked about, when you're storing cigars for not a few years, but 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years and beyond, that's critical that you don't have these large fluctuations.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, let's select something to smoke.
Sure.
this is, I mean, that's again, part of the paradox of walking humidor.
Right.
Is it's like, any rational person would be like, oh my God, you've got so many cigars, and then I come in here and I feel like I hardly have enough to smoke.
Right.
Because I'm robbing something
It's an
anytime I
embarrassment of
open a
riches,
box.
though.
Yeah. But anything, I mean, what do you enjoy? What should we
I
indulge
think,
ourselves with?
I think you're the host. You should pick.
I don't know.
I'm very
it's tough. I just need to think about what to smoke. Choices. Partagas 898, right? Beautiful cigar.
Great cigar.
I haven't seen those in years. The question is that going to give us enough time, right? Because we've got a lot to discuss. So I'm thinking we may smoke through those too quickly. So we need something larger, which puts us into Partagas Lusitania. I saw that you brought some interesting
old
Hoyos,
ones.
so
Yeah.
this could be interesting. Maybe we grab some Hoyo de Monterreys. I've got a few cabs of 50, which the only thing better than a box of 25
Is
is
a
a cab
box of 50.
Is a cab of 50.
Look at that.
And again, like these are, I mean, there's just something beautiful. And again, to the aging process, I mean, anyone that is aging their cigars will speak about how having more in an environment like a cab of 50 is better for aging. Look at these, and they're just beautiful. I mean, look at those. Wow. I mean, smell that.
Yeah, that's.
That is looks like a whole cab. So let's see if I have anything that has been.
I think you'd be broken into one by now.
I know. Well, this is part of the challenge. Is like you hate to take that first. I think that one's not been broken. So we are going to. Those are my Lusitanias. I mean, cabs are increasingly difficult to find, but are they beautiful? Let's see. Do I have? All right, well, do the honors, Charlie.
Wow.
Take your pick. Which one is speaking to you? Oh, look at that. Isn't that amazing?
There we go. Perfectly maintained, Kirby.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's, again, I'm interested in kind of picking your brain because, I still feel like such a beginner whenever it comes to
I think you're being modest. You've
the
done
process of aging. Well, I mean, it's one of those things. It's so much more easily said than done, and I'm constantly paranoid. You can see behind you right here, I've got multiple sensors because I feel like I don't trust any of them.
Right.
Not enough.
Well, these guys agree pretty much.
But they are agreeing. Actually,
Yeah.
this is not CGI.
Right.
See, I think another benefit of having you come in is I knew just you being here would get everything working. I mean, nothing more than just
Sure.
Charlie Griffin's walking the room, and everyone's like
pay
snapping
attention.
to the order and making sure. But let's go smoke these, and
All
let's
right.
go kind of go down the rabbit hole.
Sounds like a plan.
Humidification,
Let's do it.
storage, and indulging ourselves in our passions.
Love it.
Yeah. Well, there we go. I mean, I have to say, a real honor to be able to show the project to you. I would imagine you probably see a lot of your projects, but you do so many, you probably don't see them all.
We don't get to see as many as we'd like, because we pre-manufacture a lot of what we do. In your case, walk in parts and pieces.
Yeah.
And we do this all over North America and in some cases overseas. So we really strive to get out there and see our products, get photography, meet the customer, and really get to see the finished product. And actually, one of the things we do in our production facilities, we have some large display screens for communicating to the employees, but we put up completed projects so that they can actually see what they did in action.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they often are just focused on the craftsmanship of one element of that or pieces of it. So it's kind of nice for everybody to see see the fruits of their labor.
Yeah, and hopefully enjoy some of the fruits of that labor too.
Right,
Which,
exactly.
These are cigars that we selected some Hoyo de Monterrey double Coronas. This is an absolute titan of a cigar from a cabinet of 50. And so yeah, let's cut and light and do this properly. As I often say, I feel like smoking is the only thing that makes work civilized. And so this will be my favorite little El Casco cigar cutter.
It's really nice.
Well, what I love about that thing is it's a almost foolproof cutter, but because it's mechanical, it's kind of levered action, and
right.
so and then do the honors lighting. So Charlie. So first and foremost, I mean this, in many ways, just like my company, Vigilant evolved out of a passion that you had for smoking.
Sure.
Right.
Yes, it did. Had some good friends. One in particular who was a great big cigar smoker, and he was collecting cigars, not just one at a time, but boxes of cigars and good cigars. And he was complaining about his beautiful humidor, his large desktop humidor, ruining his cigars. Everything about cigars and smoking and collecting. And back in the time, this is really pre-internet, commercial internet, so people were still buying their cigars at tobacconists. We had a couple tobacconists in Boston, one in Cambridge, Mass, and one in Boston that we frequented, and we heard the same complaints. We love how pretty and beautiful the craftsmanship of our desktop humidors are, but they don't take care of our cigars, and we're frustrated that we have cigars that are too moist or cigars that are too dry, and we just started thinking and talking about it. And I was a fairly advanced hobbyist woodworker and sort of techie, and we just started discussing maybe making something larger, desktop being too small, maybe an end table. We came on the idea of let's make it a piece of furniture, and let's use technology and electronics to humidify and control the humidity level inside the humidor. And then we did a lot of exploration about how we do that, and it really came back to the simplest solution, which is just an evaporative solution. You can control the amount of moisture very easily with how much air you're moving over it and how much media that you have in terms of exposing the water to the interior of the humidor. And we started investing in some technology and doing some testing, and that took a while because we wanted to make sure that we bought a lot of cigars, and we put a lot of cigars in there, and we tested it over many months because it's a long game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not a short-term solution, and came upon a product that was attractive, functional, crafted well, and worked flawlessly.
Yeah. When did you introduce temperature control? Because that's how I initially found Vigilant.
Sure.
Was now fast forward however many years, you can find humidification systems. There's a lot of them now.
Sure.
But finding something that is also able to regulate temperature, which for the long-term aging and storage of cigars is in many ways, equally important as humidity, but exponentially difficult to find something that is able to manage that.
Right. So we talked about this a little bit before, and we started looking into temperature and humidity control in the mid 2006 to 2007 because we had a lot of customers talking about it. We were very aware of the value and the importance of it. We weren't sure that we could do it in a way that would address the physics of it, and it would be cost effective. So it took some doing, a lot of research, a lot of time. We ended up on the temperature side using thermoelectric coolers, which, as I mentioned previously, were one of the inventions from NASA from the 60s.
Okay.
They used them to heat and cool spacesuits. So when you run, it's not a compressor. It's called the Peltier effect. It's a heat sink, and when you run DC current through it in one direction, it heats, and when you run it through the other direction, it cools. So we came upon that. We found some great vendors who do miniature versions, and then started the testing there, and that was another significant level of R&D, testing, to see exactly how we could balance the temperature element and the humidity element, have them work in concert, not fighting each other, and really get our clients an environment, in that 70-70 realm, which you and I talked about. Relative humidity is relative to the temperature. The traditional 70-70 benchmark that most people use, you and I are both below that. I think we agree that it's a little bit drier than that. Maybe I'm in the mid-60s. That's about an 18.5% actual humidity, and that's where you want the benchmark really to be, not anywhere else. So that's really the story of how we got going. We had a lot of very motivated customers asking us to do this, who had had some issues with tobacco beetles, quite frankly, which when you get above
devastating.
When you get above 76 degrees, they can manifest themselves and be devastating.
Yeah.
And despite a lot of people's efforts in terms of freezing their cigars and doing other things, it seems
it's almost futile.
It's almost futile, exactly. So we had a lot of customers, as it is with a lot of things I'm sure you've experienced. Some of your best ideas come from your customers.
Yeah.
And we had a cadre and a niche of motivated, enthusiastic customers, passionate customers who wanted it. And so by 2007 into 8, we had a really good product, and it's been very successful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an interesting journey, because I think that, to me, the true zenith of enjoying fine cigars, premium tobacco, is fully realized whenever you're able to age it, right, and experience the subtleties and the experience the subtle evolutions that happen with age.
Sure.
I mean, fresh cigars, fresh Cuban cigars are exceptional, but aged Cuban cigars are somehow even better.
Right, they are.
But this is a problem that is so much more easily said than done.
Correct.
Right. And in my own journey, it was like, I first started out with a small little desktop humidor that had, at first, like what you were describing, little green,
floral foam
that you fill with water or something, which is terrible, right? Because you never know, is it dry? You're all constantly checking it.
It's too wet when you fill it, and you don't know when to refill it.
And then I went to some small little electric controlled, unit that still was terrible. So that took care of humidity, but then I ran into tobacco beetle problems. So then I bought an end table, right, that I had at the office, which again was a larger environment. I could have a larger humidification system, and more fans to kind of help the, just the flow of air.
Sure.
But then one, summer, someone stole the copper out of our HVAC units, and the office was at like 85, 90 degrees, and I had to like medevac my cigars out of the office because there was no way for me to control the temperature.
Sure.
That's an extreme example, right?
Sure.
And I think it was that experience that finally led me to Vigilant, where, we had an in-table humidor that we purchased that we now sell on kirbyallison.com from you guys, that was able to take care of both temperature and humidity. And then, as most collectors, that very large in-table humidor became small.
Right.
And it became a game of Tetris.
Sure.
And, the more cigars you pack into a small space and the less volume of basically air that you have relative to what's inside, then you end up with this situation of these wild swings of temperature and humidity because there's just no air.
Right.
And so that was finally, I think, what made me kind of bite the bullet and say, what, I've got the space. Let's take the plunge and look into actually building a proper walk-in humidor.
Sure.
Which is kind of the ultimate, solution, if you will. But even then, I find that it's so much more easily said than done because of the issue of relative humidity.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because as temperature changes, your relative humidity can shoot all over the place.
Right.
And for someone that is trying to, hit a target, I find personally that can be sometimes frustrating.
Right, and it's also an additional challenge when you're electronically sensing relative humidity. Any sensor, we have a couple of different sensors that we use. They're really accurate. They're small, which is great. But again, they're sensing two things. They're sensing the temperature first, and then the moisture content of the air, and they're giving you relative humidity. So the challenge is when you have huge temperature swings, is that if you have your, let's say you have your end table humidor. I gave you an example before where it's around 70 degrees in your house. You mentioned the incident with your HVAC system, and the temperature gets warm. So maybe your HVAC goes down, or maybe part of your house is warmer than other parts of the house because you've got a heat register.
Or it gets afternoon sun.
Or it gets afternoon sun. And before you know it, the inside of that humidor might be 76 degrees. Not only do we have the concern about the tobacco beetles as we approach 70, 76, 77, but the humidification system is sensing that warmer temperature, and in a sort of inverse logic way, it's saying, oh, well, warmer air holds more moisture. The actual readout on that humidity reading has actually been going down. So it's introducing more moisture. And that's where you get into the charts. We have one on our website. They're better than nothing, not as good as temperature, because as you mentioned, if you kept your temperature at 68 degrees Fahrenheit all the time, your challenge of maintaining a steady humidity becomes significantly less daunting, right? When you've got temperature moving around, you're sort of chasing a moving target.
Yeah.
And that's not always the best thing, because as you mentioned, if you're, I brought some cigars here that are 23 years old. That's really cool. It's like you can collect things, and you talked about the mellowing process of the tobacco over time, and a good cigar, well maintained, becomes a better cigar.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an important factor in all of this is if you don't have the ability to control the temperature, or you're not going to invest in temperature control, you really should make sure that where you're keeping your cigars in an end table or a cabinet, that you're not seeing extreme fluctuations in temperature.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's where the temperature control really comes in and kind of helping.
Right.
And for cigars, is relative humidity really the target that one should be organizing around, or is what's important actually absolute humidity?
Absolute humidity is the target.
Okay. And so that's where, the chart that you describe on your website shows, this inverse relationship that, I keep my humidor at like 62 degrees Fahrenheit, right, to preserve and help elongate or extend that aging process.
Correct.
Because it's colder, the relative humidity is going to measure higher.
Yes.
So I would keep a lower humidity than
well, you would set your system at a higher humidity because it's again, if you're at 70, let's say we like that, which most people do. If you drop your temperature, as I mentioned before, if you drop the temperature down to 59 degrees Fahrenheit, you no longer can keep that 70-70 relationship. There's just the cold air. Cold air holds less moisture. Warm air holds more moisture. That's why here in Texas in July, when it's 90 degrees and it's 80% humidity, it's super uncomfortable. If I go outside here in Texas now and it's 60 degrees and it's 70% humidity, it was spitting rain before, it's probably around there, it's not uncomfortable because there's not that much moisture in the air, and when there is moisture in the air, it drops out of the air in the form of precipitation.
Yeah.
So it's not, you can look across the city on a hot, humid day, and what are you seeing? You're seeing moisture in the air. That's the haze. Mm-hmm. So that's you're doing the right thing for the long-term storage. It's, as we mentioned with wine, when you bring temperature down, you're getting down at the lower end of where you can be. You're going to slow the aging process. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, the cigars that you're smoking are great cigars right when they're rolled. They just get a little bit better with age.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the joy of it, right?
Mm-hmm. What about excess humidity? Because again, one of the challenges I found with my cabinet humidor was that I'd have it set, say at 65, and it had both temperature and humidity control. But I found that there was kind of a runaway drift to humidity, and I'd often find, that I'd open my cabinet, it was like 75, 80% humidity.
Huh. We don't experience that with our cabinets unless there's a technical flaw or technical issue. What can happen is one of the things that's attractive about another element of having a larger cabinet humidor versus an end table is that you can set it and forget it for a long period of time. So having this the proper sized reservoir is very important. So when we spec out, we do a lot of custom work where customers want a custom size.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have to do calculations and say how much humidity do they need. We want more than they need, but not too much more than they need. Water reservoirs take up space, but we basically calculate out that we want a minimum of 4 weeks of reservoir capacity for someone's cabinet humidor, so that they can go away for 6 weeks. They don't have to be constantly monitoring it. There is everything's got a time to fill light, which gives you 2 weeks notice. Yeah. So it comes on, a third empty. Of course, you use distilled water because you want to keep out anything that might be in your domestic water, and there's less mineral content. The filters stay cleaner longer, and so that's an important element of the whole thing. So one of the problems that can happen with a cabinet humidor with a system that hasn't been necessarily engineered is you probably were getting passive humidity evaporating out of the reservoir by itself. Okay. Okay, so we have to be very careful of the aperture sizes, and you have fan openings and they're open. So I suppose you could use some type of a louver system. That's complicated. So we just do the math and we figure it out that with nothing running, passive evaporation needs to be significantly below the level of where ideal is. Okay. And that the fans come on when the sensor asks them to get them to that level. Yeah. So that could have been what was happening.
Yeah. And this is one of the amazing characteristics, right, is how much more easily said than done it actually is, right? I mean, just this element of, your ambient kind of evaporation is something that, I'd never even really considered before, but it speaks to the attention and detail to which Vigilant brings its engineering behind these control systems.
Yeah, and we just had our 30th anniversary, so we've been doing this for 30 years, and experience matters. We learn when we learn from our customers, we learn from experience. We're always trying to improve and make things better, make things smaller. The less space that the electronics takes up, the more room there is for cigars. Yeah. So that's a benefit too.
It's amazing the amount of sophistication and attention to detail Vigilant brings to kind of solving this problem. And for someone, like you said, that is, investing in a collection of wine or cigars, and really, not even the financial investment, but the emotional investment, in the aging, to open up a box, that you've had for 10 or 15, or in the case of these Hoy de Monterreys that you brought, the double Coronas, and find that tobacco beetles have chewed through everything, is like losing a child.
It's interesting. You talk about that, right? The emotional and the you care about it, so you can be worried about it because you've got a lot of your favorite things and investment. There was a famous ad, TV public promotion ad back in the 50s that said, "It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are?" Yeah. And then in the 80s, UPS kind of stole it and said, "It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your package is?" Yeah. And then we started saying it around our facility, like it's whatever o'clock, do you know how your cigars are doing? And so, that can weigh on you, especially if you have a large collection. You might have multiple homes or whatever, and you've got some here and some there, and you may not be there often. So you want to have a confidence that, that while you're gone and you're not there and you're not able to pay attention to it, that you come back and everything's okay. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's really, really important, and it means that what we do electronically, how we put things together, there needs to be a lot of integrity to it.
Yeah, I mean, obsessing, because of, out of love is one thing, but obsessing out of paranoia is another.
Correct.
And I find that, again, it's that paranoia that you're really trying to solve against. Right. I know that Vigilant sells independent control units for the humidification. Sure. But whenever it comes to temperature control, is that something that can be added to a cabinet after the fact?
It's really not viable, not possible to do.
And why is that? Because I know that a lot of people have called us and asked,
sure,
and asked for help. I've got a cabinet that I built, or that was my builder built it into my house. I've got temperature or humidity, solved for. I've got a friend that uses a Vigilant system, in his cabinet, but it was getting too much kind of ambient sunlight in the afternoon, and temperature was becoming an issue.
Sure.
And so he wanted to see if he could retrofit it for temperature control.
Right. So there's several obstacles to that. Some of it's just the integrity of how it's done and the electronics and where things are located in relation to each other. You don't want the temperature element to be that close to where the moisture is being introduced into the cabinet. Okay. There's just a lot of reasons for that in terms of condensation potential and other things. And by the way, the cooling unit, if it's running a lot, is going to generate some moisture, some condensation. And the way we do it is any moisture that does develop, gravity drops into a reservoir and goes back into the water source tank that's providing the humidity. That's one. You had me bring a panel here. This is what we call in the business a SIP panel. These are used in a lot of different industries. This isn't something we invented. But we do have a pretty cool methodology for making it. And as you can see from here, there's actually insulation in the center of that.
Yeah, it's significant. I mean, this is an inch of
that's got
insulation.
that 2-inch panel has an R value of somewhere around 9.
Okay.
Okay. A pane of glass would be around 0.8. So it's about 10 times more insulated than a pane of glass, and it's about 4 times more insulated than a wooden panel in a cigar.
Okay.
So potentially in a smaller humidor, you could do temperature control without a lot of insulation because you've got plenty of cooling to do that. But once it starts to get a little bit larger, you've got to start treating that cabinet like it's almost like an exterior product.
Yeah.
So as with our wine cabinetry, they look like beautiful wooden cabinets, but they're constructed like refrigerators. So not only are they insulated and very well sealed, but the doors are multi-pane glass. When we get into white wine environments, triple pane glass.
Really?
And all of the doors and the jambs have exterior style weather stripping, which is invisible to the client because you don't want to look at all that stuff.
Yeah.
So you want it to be, again, one of our great sort of charges as designers of these things is aesthetics is vital, performance is vital, and the two need to be elegantly matched together to provide a great product.
Yeah.
So, our controllers, our new controllers that I was showing you that's there, that when we redesigned that in 2019, we basically added 2 inputs. So one controller can control temperature and humidity on a menu.
Okay.
You push the temperature, you check the temperature, you push humidity, you can adjust the humidity. And again, when we ship our product, we ship stuff at 67, not at 70. You always want to err on the side of it being a little bit on the drier side and not the moisture side. And as you know, Kirby, like the ultimate, judge of whether your cigars are being maintained is you.
Yeah.
So whenever we have a customer who says, I'm worried about, is it too dry, is it too moist? We say, here's the test. Take out a cigar, feel your cigar. Is it feel about the right, and smoke your cigar? As you know, one of the ironies of is a moist cigar burns harder than a dry cigar because you've got a lot more steam being produced, and it feels hot. And then a moist cigar doesn't smoke very well, right? Because the filler wrapper is swollen, and the channels of air to move from the lid end to where you're smoking are being compromised or being blocked. And we've all probably smoked a dry cigar here and there in our time, and that's like a tinderbox. It just burns too fast. It doesn't taste right. So that's when you talk about you keeping the temperature lower and humidity a little bit lower. I mean, some of that is your long-term storage hat, and I think some of that's where you like your cigar. And it's not exactly the same for everybody.
Yeah.
But you and I tend to agree that we err a little bit on the cooler and drier side.
Absolutely. Yeah. Interesting. I mean, it's when you see this cross section, right? I mean, it really just goes to show you the amount of insulation that's required in order to maintain that ambient temperature at below 70 degrees.
Right, and when you talk about...
But when you see the cabinet,
sure.
like you would never...
Right.
You wouldn't,
Can't tell.
it's totally invisible to the
You can when you
naked
pick
eye.
it up, because they do get a little heavy.
I bet, yeah.
But, you know, the best outcome and the best way one of these things performs is that the mechanical elements of it aren't really running all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're sort of just the vanguard. They're the guardian. They're just topping off. They're just making a little adjustment, a little bit of an adjustment, like we talked about before. You don't want these big, great swings, temperature or humidity. You could have your humidity perfectly dialed in, as we said, and if your temperature swings are significant, day to night, season to season, it's not a great environment for long-term storage.
Well, let's talk about that, right?
Sure.
Because again, one of the other great things about technology now is it's possible to basically log temperature and humidity and plot it out.
Correct.
And so this is, the temperature and humidity of the walk-in humidor, the top graph being temperature, and the bottom graph being humidity. And, I mean, we've got a cycle here.
Right.
Right? And is that normal?
That's very normal. We looked at this before. That's you've got about from top to top or bottom to bottom. You got about 1 hour. You have a temperature range in there of about 3 to 4 degrees.
And is that? I mean, that looks big on the graph, but
it looks big on the graph.
Pretty
and
tight.
as you mentioned before, in a large room, that's not as much of an issue. In a smaller cabinet, that might be a little bit more of an issue. But what you do is you draw a line right through the center of it, and that's what the cigars are at, right there in the middle.
Yeah.
Cigars absorb and desiccate, and they give off moisture and take on moisture at a very slow pace.
Yeah.
Okay, so
one of
it's
the values
okay.
of also being able to age in boxes, right?
One of
Is
the
that
it's
also
always
helps
better to be
buffer?
aging in your boxes. I mean, cigars are they're fraternal beings.
Yeah.
They want to be
They
together.
want to be together. That's
They want
right.
to be together.
Better
They're
in company.
They're good company, and they basically take care of each other, right? I mean, like a full. You're right about an over full cigar cabinet not being ideal, but a full one, a properly filled one, actually is the best environment, because the cigars themselves are. I use the example of an aircraft carrier. If the captain puts the aircraft, they're going 3/4 speed, and they shut the engines off, the aircraft carrier will drift for 5 miles.
Okay. Wow.
So there's an inertia of that. And that's the same thing with the humidity. All the insides of the cigar cabinets are not finished with lacquer. They're left natural. Spanish cedar and mahogany, equally good at what they do.
And we went with mahogany.
Yeah, and Spanish cedar's now been listed as potentially going on an endangered list.
Okay.
So we have customers
Stockpiling that?
Well, I mean, it's once you have it, and it's okay. But if it does get listed, you can only buy it after something that's been harvested by that date.
Yeah.
Or it's very, very hard to get, and the price has gotten really high. But again, that interior desiccant value of the wood and of the cigars themselves really creates this sort of inertial environment. You get that temperature and humidity where you want it, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And then if we look at the, this is I think a week. And
Right.
again, it looks pretty dramatic.
You look at your humidity though. Your humidity is
pretty
really
consistent.
tight. It's super tight.
And you can see where I'm playing around with the temperature.
Right.
But
Exactly.
part of the kind of obsession.
Yes.
But the Vigilant system, right? I mean, in the walk-in, you designed, right? You spec'd it out with Blind Guardian and the Condair. Very, when you kind of step back, very effective at managing that environment.
Yeah. I mean, you've had cigars in there now for a year plus, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know how long this guy's been in there, but it's smoking great. It's right where you want it. It's perfect.
Yeah, amazing. Well, let's talk about kind of some of your projects, because that's where it gets exciting.
Sure.
Vigilant, I guess is in some ways multidisciplinarian, right? Because there's design aspect, woodworking, which is ultimately, the bulk of what you're doing is crafting the wood.
Right.
And then, of course, designing the control systems, with the humidity and the temperature to ensure that you're able to, really achieve, kind of the technical goal, which is maintaining that environment.
Right.
What are some of the cool, projects?
We've
Because
got-
I mean, you know, my project, I think, in the scope of what I've seen on
your
your
project-
website is like, you know, middle to low.
No,
you know.
no. It's you know, honestly, it spans. We do a lot of residential B2C, and we do a lot of B2B. You mentioned sort
And
of
a lot of wine too, right?
a lot of wine. You mentioned the second cigar boom. Cigar, you know, environments and cigar lounges are still a thing, and we have projects on the books now for multiple cigar lounges and rooms. And you know, when you talk about the working with the functionality and the craftsmanship and the technology, it's not a set formula. So we're always we have great interior designers and clients who have visions, and they say, I want it to look like this. Sometimes it's things we've never even thought of, and we go, that's really cool. But at the same time, we need to tap the brakes a little bit and say, okay, so, but you know that this is a functional, important thing that we have to make sure that when it's up and running, that it's doing its job. And it's not just, you know, figuring out how much humidity they need and where things are going to get put. It's also understanding the dynamics of the airflow. You get something that's super tall. You can't just have a humidity source that sits down at the bottom and cranks out moisture, because you're just going to get a difference in humidity levels. So at certain points, a plenum gets introduced, which is an open air space in the back of the humidor where there's apertures up the back with airflow, and we build it all out so that, you know, we're creating the proper amount of static pressure so that the humidity at the top of the cabinet, 8, 7, 8, 9, sometimes taller up to the top, is the same as it is down at the bottom. And, you know, you're sensing, and, you know, sometimes the air, we're moving the air not because it needs humidity, we're moving the air so that it's creating a consistent ambient condition in there so that it's the same. So, and then when we get into, we do a lot of lockers, humidified lockers.
Well, we took some pictures. Let's do a show and
yeah.
tell,
Let's
'cause
look at
it's
some of
always
these.
it's always
Sure.
more fun to see.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's take a peek. Guys, like, there we go. So that's some of your stuff, which is super cool. Yeah. So this is a tobacconist in Washington D.C. Again, this tobacconist is over 170 years in business. They've moved 3 times. They unfortunately lost their lease about 12 years ago and moved about 6 blocks away. When we went over and met the owners and to the old facility, they had display cases that had clay brick galvanized pans in the bottom of their display cases that they filled with water every day. And they kept and they opened and closed apertures in the back of the display cases to the open air to when the humidity got too high.
so totally manually controlled.
200-year-old technology. So we had to bring them into the 21st century, but the reason we went there was to recreate a lot of the ambiance and the style and the old world craftsmanship that they wanted. And this, you know, and there were some places where they're displaying merchandise, but most of the stuff that we built for them was humidified, and all different sizes and shapes, which required customization. This is their part of their area there, which is really cool. And lighting is also a really big part of the concept of it. For ambiance and for how it looks, but functionality, just so you can see what you're doing in there and you can see your cigars. And lighting's an issue, right? Because you talked about, you know, we use all the last 5 or 6 years. LED lighting has really taken off in terms of the availability of it and, you know, the options that you have. So the LED lighting creates virtually no heat, which you don't want, as we talked about, and it doesn't create a lot of ultraviolet light that could damage your cigars. I still wouldn't recommend people leave their lights on all the time. They should turn them off at night. I mean, this is a cigar lounge in Washington, D.C. And again, these were specified by the designer.
Look at them. These are all cigar cabinets?
Those are all cigar lockers. And again, all materials specified by this is longleaf pine. And there is plenum systems all through the back of this. The humidification systems are actually in a utility room behind that wall.
Wow.
Yep, making it very easy for them to maintain. And this is the Ritz Cigar Lounge in St. Louis that I mentioned to you earlier. There's over 400 lockers in here. Again,
400.
all 400 lockers, all humidified.
Wow.
Through a plenum system. They also have a series of display cases where they merchandise cigars out of, right there on the
Gorgeous.
right. Yep.
This needs to be, the next iteration of my at-home lounge. Look at that.
Here's some examples of just some cabinets we've built.
And cabinets, again, I mean, very popular, with Vigilant.
Really popular.
Right? Because
Yep.
you don't need an entire room, right?
don't.
You can, and it's a piece of furniture. And you like this, I mean, it's a finished piece of furniture that works into the decor of the room. It's got the lighting.
Right.
And of course, it's to someone that's into their cigars,
Right.
displays their beautiful cigars.
You can actually see those apertures up on the back wall, and those are humidification supply apertures that are
Okay.
returning the air.
So you have a plenum in the back.
Yep.
That is basically
Not
mixing.
always, but when you get that tall, you need to
need
go
it.
to a plenum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And again, this is one of these details of like retrofitting, or having someone that's not a specialist, like a builder
Right.
or a furniture maker,
Sure.
saying, "Oh yeah, of course I can build a cabinet for your cigars,"
Right.
but not understanding, the very, nuanced and technical dynamics,
Right.
and it's fluid dynamics,
Right.
between the humidity and the temperature.
Perfect example here. This is a really beautiful cigar cabinet in a wine cellar. We get this request a lot, and as we mentioned with the temperature relationship, you can't just stick a non-conditioned cigar cabinet into a wine cellar, especially if the cellar's at 55 degrees. You just can't.
Because that's too cold.
You can't get enough moisture in that cabinet to keep
really?
the cigars moist enough.
Okay.
So that cabinet has temperature. It's heating all the time, which is simple, very easy. As I said, when you're not cooling, you're not creating condensation. You're not. It's a very gentle, easy thing to do in terms of the mechanics of it. But it's still, you need to insulate it. It has to have the exterior grade, doors to seal it.
And then would this be double pane or triple pane?
That would probably, it might be single pane even, it might be double pane. It depends on how much, if for you it would be single pane, because for us to get from 55 to 62 is not much.
Yeah.
If we had to go from 55 to 70,
Yeah.
that would probably, but we have a calculator that calculates
Yeah.
all that out.
Amazing.
This is a residential humidor in a gentleman's smoking room in Massachusetts. It was sort of his idea. He wanted that granite countertop, and it's a two-piece system. The bottom is partly humidified and partly not. Part of it's for storage. Of accessories and things like that, which you obviously don't want humidified, because you've got things like your lighter or your cutter in there. Here's an example of a small. We build these. These are kind of fun units for.
And these are something like what we're selling, kind of on our website now.
Right.
But it's a digital control system.
Yep.
And it's not relying on, basically,
Nope. And it's,
passive evaporation or anything.
yeah, and it has I have one in my office. I fill it in the wintertime in New England. I probably fill it once a month or so, and I don't fill it all summer. I fill it maybe every 7 or 8 weeks.
Amazing.
Here's an example of one of our end tables that's customized. So the customer wanted some contemporary handles, and they wanted feet, and not a base. So a little bit different look.
And do you have like interior designers sending you sketches and saying,
Absolutely,
build this?
all the time.
Yeah.
And our design team loves that.
Okay.
That's their Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
That's how they figure things out. This is a good example of the unfinished interior, right? So, when we do a drawer or we do interiors, they're all unfinished material. Mahogany and Spanish cedar and the like are very happy at those humidity levels.
Yeah.
And they're a tropical wood. And if we do a drawer, we always put
Grates.
grates in the bottom so that we promote airflow. As
And
you
here
talked about.
we see the plenum, where
You see a
it's
plenum there.
basically
Right.
mixing that air and then pushing it out.
Right. I think
with
this is
velocity.
another picture of the same humidor, just capturing
That's gorgeous.
the whole thing.
Wow.
Let's see what else we got here that's worthy of showing here. Let's see. Some of these are. Here's a really interesting. One of our most popular products are our in-wall humidors.
Okay.
This is a custom. This customer came up with this interior display that he wanted. So he wanted all his cigars on the side standing up, and he wanted the bins for his boxes in the
Standing
center.
up.
He wanted
Single sticks?
That's what he wanted. That's what he wanted. You and I aren't in love with that idea from a long-term storage thing, but it does look really cool. And he's a big cigar smoker, so he goes, look, those aren't going to be there very long. I bring them out from the boxes, and I smoke those.
Yeah, well, it's taking, what's available to pull from to the next level.
Right. Right.
Literally, on the rack.
Exactly.
Ready to go.
Yeah, so that's a very large in wall. That's as large probably as we've built. I mean, our in walls are all designed so that we have a slim in wall that will fit between two wall studs. Mm-hmm. So installing that can be very simple. A matter of cutting out between two studs the amount of space that you need, and then we've got two different depths. So one can fit in a 2x4 wall, one can fit in a 2x6 wall if you're looking for more capacity. It can also protrude into a utility room if that's the case.
Yeah.
The only tricky part with those is getting a really nice hidden electrical connection.
Yeah.
So you don't have a wire hanging down. So if you can wire it in the wall, or you can wire it into a back room or something like that. And I believe that's a custom color too.
Yeah. And another example of an end table.
That's an end table. That's a standard end table that you carry that we've manufactured for a long time, and it's a great product.
Yeah. And this has a glass top.
As a glass top, I'm not a huge fan of glass tops for all the same reasons you and I just talked about. You're letting a lot of ultraviolet light in, and people love to look at it, love to see their cigars, but from a pure storage, long-term storage, cigar care approach, it's probably not the best plan. And we tell people that.
Yeah. But what I like about the end table is that it's a really nice happy medium between a simple desktop humidor,
right?
Which, I've got a desktop humidor at my house that is great for cigars that I'm pulling from and smoking regularly. But anyone that's into, again, long-term aging, you need, ideally you're, keeping the cigars in their box.
Right.
Right? And you're buying full boxes, right?
Right.
You want to preserve that box state, right?
You do.
And so you need enough space in order to put full boxes into a cabinet to store. And so, this is, again, that perfect happy medium between a desktop humidor and a walk-in.
Right.
To be at the threshold of a walk-in humidor, you've got to be a little bit of a fanatic. This is most people. A simple end table like this is going to allow you to control humidity, control temperature, with Vigilant, do it with sophistication and with certainty that it's going to be done well, but then also have a beautiful piece of furniture that you're able to, hide your cigars in.
Right.
Which, depending on your wife's opinion on your smoking habit,
exactly.
The hiding is an important part. That's another interesting kind of display.
Oh yeah, that's really cool. That's we did that for a hunting club, and those are cool leather panels with brass tacks that were specified by a designer, very bespoke.
Another great one. Look at this.
Yeah, that's an in-wall built into a guy's smoking room.
So this is an example of something that would go in between two studs.
That's a double, so you have to cut one stud out.
Yeah.
But we have a whole tutorial on our website about it.
And then the nice bar, with everything else you need. Wow, look at this. This is another cool one, right? Again,
So
you can specify custom finishes. Doesn't have to all be wood.
It don't have to all be wood. We have, we're, believe it or not, we're a small New Hampshire company, but we have a very good pulse of what's going on in the design world in terms of colors and finishes.
Well, this one perfectly matches your jacket.
Yeah, right. It does. It does. It's perfect. For a while, for about 4 years, everything was black walnut, especially in design in restaurants and clubs, and that's finally passed. Black walnut became very difficult to find. Everybody's using it for flooring and for paneling. We did our big restaurant in Boston for wine cabinets and trim that was all black walnut.
Yeah.
It was.
Look at this. This is another something I'd never expected to see.
So that's cool. So a guy asked us if we could take one of our humidors and we could custom build him one so that it could fit into a drawer in his bar area. And he didn't want to see him, and we figured it all out for him. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, look at that. It's amazing. Let's see if there's anything else to point at. Oh, this is that one.
That's the one that we
the
set
single
that up
sticks.
with all the cigars in it.
It's actually pretty beautiful, I must
It's
say.
pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
It's one of the things that I love going into a beautiful cigar shop. Especially the lounges in London, which have absolutely beautiful humidors.
Right.
you know, there is something to be said about seeing the sticks out.
There is. We did
It works in a cigar shop where you're rotating those, you know, quickly. It would not work for anyone that is looking to really hold an age.
No.
But there's a beauty to that, you know, the lineup.
Well, it's we did a really cool bespoke large humidor for the famous restaurant in Napa called French Laundry, and yeah, we did about 5 years ago. And
Humidor.
A humidor, and they really wanted the cigars. They were, you know, they said these cigars are like artwork. We want people to see them, and we want when people see them. It's the same thing with wine. When at the clubs and restaurants we do, we remind the management team that when people see it, they're going to partake.
Yeah.
Be more likely to partake.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you put your cigar display and your wine display as people come into the space, and they're going to go, oh, what a great night for a cigar. What a great night to have a bottle of wine. And again, you know, it's in the right environment. It's being taken care of. We all know that. I mean, I'm a golfer, and I never buy cigars at someone's golf shop because I just know they're not going to be they're not going to be any good because they haven't been taken care of. They're in a jar.
Yeah.
They've been sitting there. Who knows how long they've been there?
And if there's any humidity at all.
Not at all.
I mean,
you know, so
I mean, it's like even if it has a little humidification element,
Right.
it's often sorely neglected.
right. So I'm always well supplied.
Yeah. What's the design process look like for someone that's looking to commission the construction of a custom, you know,
Well-
walk-in or built-in humidor?
Some of our customers have a very strong idea of what they want to do, and we start the conversation there. In some cases they've already got a designer or an architect who sketched something out. In most cases, what we do is we get online, we get on a Teams call with the client, and we start walking through images of some of the work we've done. And we say, is this on the right track? Are we doing something here? Do you want to do something there? And we get the basic requirements of size, scope, and those things. And then we start looking at the mechanics of it. And then, honestly, a huge percentage of the time is materials and finishes.
Yeah.
You know, we have a job that we just did 7 months ago that we had to wait 4.5 months for these large poles that the client wanted for these large cabinets, and the poles themselves weighed 45 pounds apiece.
Really?
I mean, it's like weightlifting to put these things on, and we knew that in advance. Again, another level of planning and design. We had to plan the hinges and the doors to be, you know, robust enough to be able to handle that weight.
Yeah.
And it was phenomenal. It was beautiful. Leather. You would have loved it, Kirby. It had leather on it, and it was, you know, hand carved. It was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so we get a lot of, when we show pretty pictures and stuff, we get a lot of credit. You know, oftentimes it really wasn't our design idea. We did some cabinets for a really beautiful restaurant in Manhattan about 4 years ago, and when we started getting the material layouts, people started looking at it and saying, "Oh my gosh, it was like the Miami Dolphins colors without the fuchsia, the sort of the tropical green."
Uh-huh.
And there were very large cabinets, and we were like, "This is, you know, out there a little bit." And when we got the pictures, our installers went down, and they were in their place with the travertine tile walls around them, and all the wine and everything in there. It was like, wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun working with the designers. Sometimes they go out on a limb a little bit too much for us, and we can't make it work.
Yeah.
Technically, we have to say no sometimes.
Yeah.
This isn't going to work. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
And how much of your business now is wine cellars versus humidors?
the wine business is a lot larger than the cigar business. I mean, the cigar business is very important to us. We love our customers. It's a solid business. As you mentioned, I mean, there's been
Well, it's a niche that you dominate because, I mean, in the United States, there literally is not another manufacturer of large walk-in humidors that I can think of.
Right.
Right. And I've done the searching.
Yeah.
And you might be able to find someone, again, that does cabinets or does large units, but doesn't bring the level of sophistication to the environment
Right.
that someone that's collecting really should be demanding.
Right, and we're focused on it,
Yeah.
right? So we don't do other things. We don't do other types of cabinetry. We don't do kitchens. We don't do. This is what we, you know, one of our slogans for a long time was protecting your passions.
Yeah.
Whether it's wine or cigars, you know, we're going to protect your passions first. We talked about that anxiety level and the value of importance around maintaining them and taking care of them. And then if we can do it, and we can also do it, and it can be beautiful at the same time, then that's the win.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, Charlie, thank you so much for coming into the office.
you're welcome.
And it's been a real honor to show you the humidor and the collection, to enjoy a cigar, which is ultimately what you know, this is all about, is enjoying great cigars and great company. And you know, the work that you're doing is first rate. We're excited to have added, you know, the smaller end tables and desktop electronically controlled humidors onto the website to offering that. But of course, anyone that's looking to take the plunge into something even more extravagant and amazing, you know, can reach out directly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Charlie,
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, cheers.